Hey, Grant, can you still hear me all right?
Yes, I can, sir.
Hey, Grant, thanks for allowing me to do this, man. I've been so excited lately. This
Beautiful.
is such a crazy time. So glad I got the chance to finally talk with you. I know you're really busy, but I've been watching your videos like crazy, and now I got all these questions. Like, gotta send this to Grant, and then
Yeah, my pleasure to help out because this is the kind of questions that a lot of people are going to have. So let's go through them, and you have to keep in mind that this is my opinion on a lot of this stuff. I'm not like 100% sure. I'm sort of an observer on the outside, and as I mentioned to you before this thing started, I have 78 people on a list that I think are involved with the story that I'm following. But I'm sort of an outside observer like you. I may just have a little more contact with the people, but it's an interesting story, as you point out.
So one part that I'm kind of missing is how this whole thing got started. I know that Chris Mellon was on UFO Data. He was working with Leslie Keane. So,
Yep.
I mean, who went to the New York Times? Who went to Politico? How did the whole thing come about there? Like, do these guys just go to the New York Times and say, look, you got to look into this? Or, you know, because I don't think it was the other way around. I think the New York Times went to them and said, hey, we need some new viewership.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, you're right. It was if you look at the day after the October the 11th news conference, Tom DeLonge puts out, I think it's on Facebook. It's either a tweet or on Facebook, where he says every word that was spoken today has been planned for months. So this is, people got to remember this, number one, this is carefully planned or operation. And it wasn't, that's the thing that sort of proves it. It wasn't just the New York Times. It was the Washington Post, and it was Politico. These were the three major game players in media who all on the same day ran an in-depth piece on government disclosure and officials, the fact that this is for real. So it was carefully orchestrated. And the guy that's actually behind it is, this is my opinion, but I'm pretty sure of it, is Jim Semivan. Jim Semivan was sitting on the stage, and I'll take over the screen here for just a second here, and I will show you Jim Semivan. Let's see here. Let's get the screen here. I just want to show you. Okay, now let me go to PowerPoint here. This is Jim Semivan here. Here he is. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, this is Beth Mendelson, who is the senior executive producer of special programming and documentary at Voice of America. Voice of America is basically the official news broadcaster of the U.S. government around the world in various countries. And a lot of people have the idea that this is where CIA broadcast messages, and they try to get out the American message. So here's this guy who is here on this picture with Voice of America, and he is very powerful guy. He is the key guy. I say he's running the whole operation. He's been described as the equivalent of a two-star general, an SES-2, which is on the civilian end equivalent to a two-star general. Very key guy, and the way it was described to me was that he's picked because he is the guy that can actually make things happen. He's very good at this kind of stuff. And it was reported to me that he was the guy that arranged all this stuff, coordinating 3 newspapers going with this story. So Jim Semivan is the guy, and it is actually 3 newspapers that are running this thing. The Mellon thing, of the 78 people on my list, Chris Mellon is not a major player as far as I can tell right now. I mean, he's a major player, but I really have nothing that really says anything positive or negative about his position. He's a big money guy. Ron Pandolfi, when his name was made public, actually stated this guy has been in the UFO game since the 1980s. So he comes across, he was actually interviewed, strangely. He was interviewed when I was on Coast to Coast with George Knapp, promoting my book, Managing Magic, which is my my account of what I think is going on. That for 70 years they've been doing exactly what they're doing right now. They're running one of these operations where they have picked somebody who's able to get out a message. They're managing the message. They're going through these other people and doing small d disclosure. Because again, if you wanted to do disclosure, you put the president out, you put the CIA director. They're not doing disclosure. They're doing gradual disclosure. And so Mellon was on the same show. He came on after me on that show. The thing I recall most about, because he had come forward, if you remember, he was actually interviewed by Leslie Kean early, about a year before this story broke, about a year ago, maybe even more, a year ago. And Leslie Kean is the one who did the official story on Tom Delonge. So she's like sort of like an embedded journalist. Tom Delonge, even in one interview, I think it was the Motherboard interview, actually said that he had gone to his advisors, what he calls the advisors, and he had wanted to bring in Rolling Stone, and they said no, they're not interested. And Leslie Kean was picked to do the story. So when they did the October 11th broadcast, if you remember, Elizondo quits like the day before, a couple days before that event takes place. And the day after he resigns from the Department of Defense, he is interviewed by Leslie Kean. So this is all arranged. Leslie Kean is the official person who's going to present the story. She gets to interview Elizondo and Mellon and Jim Semivan and Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff, and she interviews all these people, and she puts out the official sort of story for the October 11th event. And she also is one of the 3 writers on the New York Times story. So she's critical. Her key role is that she is friends with John Podesta, and John Podesta is one of the advisors to Tom Delonge. Now, Podesta was he was an advisor to President Obama. He was Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, or the running the presidential campaign, and he was chief of staff for Bill Clinton during Bill Clinton's administration. So he's a very powerful guy, and he wrote the foreword to Leslie Kean's book. So this is how Leslie Kean gets into this. She's sort of a reporter who's not going to, get into speculation. She's only going to report on what is sort of like sort of middle ground type material, no speculation, and she can be trusted. So she gets the nod from Tom Delonge's advisors as being sort of the official spokesman. Now, she interviews Mellon, and when Mellon went on the show, the Coast to Coast show, right after I was on, I still remember him specifically saying there's not a shred of evidence that that the government knows anything. This is the story that John Alexander's always put out, is like there is individual interest inside the government. There are people inside the government who have sightings and are interested, but there is no institutional interest. There is nobody running a UFO program. So I was kind of shocked to see him on the stage with Tom Delonge on October the 11th, where he suddenly is talking about the Nimitz and we need congressional investigations. And all I can think in the back of my head was, here's this guy saying there's not one shred of evidence that anybody is running an operation. Now, what he says in his defense is that he resigned from the Department of Defense before this operation began, this 2007 operation with Elizondo, where they spent the $22 million for 5 years. So Mellon he's there. He hasn't played a major role. He's not one of the guys I've really gotten anything on, but that's sort of to give an idea where this come from. This has been running for a long time. I did a number of webinars for Portals to Ascension, going back a year and a half. I've known about Jim Semivan for 2.5 years. He has only been with Tom Delonge for less than 2 years. I knew about him before. I had stated a year ago that I was told that high-level government officials would come public. They would name themselves and they would say this is for real. That's exactly what happened on December the 16th. So this is a project that has been in the offing for a long time. A lot of people have been talking about behind the scenes. This was what happened on October was no surprise to me. What happened in December was no surprise to me. I had said this was going to happen. The only thing that sort of we had off was the timing, was that it appeared that they had a lot of problems organizing this thing, getting it all ready to run. But when it did run, you can see New York Times said it was one of the biggest stories they've ever done. So it was very successful, this sort of a launch. And what I would point out to people is that this is only the beginning. All they're doing in this first one is launching the idea that they should have done in 1947. And that is to say that there are UFOs, we don't know what they are, and they should be investigated. So that's like a 1947 thing. They know an awful lot more than what they put out. But this is just the first step. So they're going to lead people through these steps of release. They're going to do the medals. They're going to do the more video, and hopefully these documents. But this is just a first stage. This is a long process that will you'll see these leaks going on. I don't know how often, a month, every month something leaked until they really get people going on this thing. So this is only the beginning.
That'll be neat to see how that comes out.
Yeah.
The 22 million and the Robert Bigelow connection. So a lot of guys say, oh, it's just, Senator Harry Reid, he just gives this money to Bigelow. Oh, he's one of my buddies, he's involved in getting elected or whatever. Their Vegas ties. Like, I don't know. I don't see that. Do you have any insight on that? The whole Harry Reid background, Robert Bigelow?
Yeah. Well, if you want to listen, Desta and I put up at the It's All Connected Publishing website in the news section. We put up an interview that, or the first hour of Coast to Coast when George Knapp, the day after this story broke, George Knapp goes on his Coast to Coast show, and for the first hour he talks about this whole thing, about the fact that he knew from 2007. He knew that this was on, and he was not allowed to talk about it. He's very good friends with Bigelow, and what people have to remember is all these people are good friends with Bigelow, because Bigelow has thrown piles of money at the UFO subject for decades, and he's also thrown money at consciousness. So all the players that are in this game have all played the game with Bigelow, because he's like, for example, he had NIDS in the 1990s and early 2000s. He had the group called NIDS, the Institute, the Discovery Science, and most of the players that are on DeLonge's team are on that panel. They were, Bigelow was trying to figure it out. He was paying people as consultants, picking their brain to figure out what was going on. So Bigelow's been in this a long time. George Knapp knew this, and Reid has been in this a long time. The way George Knapp describes it is George Knapp said that Harry Reid, when the Area 51 story first was going to break, it happened in the spring of 1989, he stated that Harry Reid was the first guy that he ever told the story to. And he actually told him before the Area 51 story broke. So him and Reid, he said that him and Reid have been talking about UFOs for years, that any time he would interview Harry Reid on a subject of whatever, something that had nothing to do with UFOs, they would move off camera and they would sit there and whisper and talk about UFOs, what's the latest on UFOs, and that it really annoyed Harry Reid's staff that they didn't know what Knapp and Reid were talking about. So Reid has been very interested. The whole thing with and I can only take George Knapp, and I believe George Knapp is the real deal. George Knapp said that there was a bidding process for the thing, and that that nobody was really that interested. And Bigelow, of course, knew the bid was there. This is what Bigelow always wanted, and that Bigelow presented the lowest bid and actually put in more money. That a lot of he spent way more than $22 million. He built these facilities to handle the material and all this kind of stuff. That this is what he's been looking for all along. So it sounds to me like it was a legitimate bidding process. A lot of people may not have really realized the significance, but in terms of Bigelow would have known exactly that this was the contract that he always wanted. And so to me, it sounds like it was a legitimate process. He won the bid, and he actually spent more money than he got from this thing. So it actually cost him money. But he now, as I said, brilliantly controls all the UFO data. He controls all the files. He controls all the hardware. Controls all the films. He controls everything.
All right. So on the next one, then, it kind of relates to this. What do we know about these 34, 38 reports? Is that Bigelow and Bass and part of his investigations? What do we have any info on that?
Yeah, that comes from George Knapp, and that's in that interview that we posted at the It's All Connected Publishing website. And he states the first interview he talked about, he said that there were 36 reports. And if you remember, the New York Times stated there was a report that was 490 pages. So we're talking major report, not just this little video. There's a lot of stuff. So 490-page report. And so what he said at that point was that there were 36 videos, and a number of them were hundreds of pages long, up to this 490-page report. So there are thousands of pages of reports that Bob Bigelow produced over these 5 years on whatever they were doing. You know, looking at videos. There were stories that the Skinwalker Ranch was part of it. The investigation there. So you would have reports on Skinwalker Ranch. Bob Bigelow had 46 full-time people working for him, and these were high-level researchers, former police, intelligence, FBI type people, you know, really good investigators who were working on these sort of things. So at that point, he said there was 36 reports. And then in a later interview, I don't remember exactly which interview it was. It may have been the one with National Public Radio. It was on one of them. He stated that there were also 38 technical reports, which would indicate to me, if they're not the same thing, it sounds like there could be as many as 74 reports done for this $22 million. And again, that's all controlled by Bob Bigelow. And there was a couple days ago, there was a Nevada newspaper that actually went to Bob Bigelow, and he refused to talk. So whether they're going to leak this out, what the plan is, I know the New York Times was doing a story, because Bob Bigelow's not talking. The New York Times was doing a story, and I was contacted by Michael Lee Hill, who was very famous for the Lake Erie UFO stuff. And his claim is that he's the biological son of Eric Clapton. He's an experiencer. He's very much into the Anunnaki. He's got all sorts of experiences and stuff like that. And he claimed a couple days ago, and I haven't interviewed him about it yet, he offered to be interviewed, but stated that he had been contacted by the New York Times because he was contacted by Bigelow. He was one of the cases. Chris Bledsoe was one of the cases. He was the first STAR team investigation that was done by the Bigelow STAR team, or the MUFON STAR team. And Michael Lee Hill was also investigated. So the New York Times was talking to Michael Lee Hill about who in the Bigelow organization interviewed him. So you can see that the New York Times is still working on Bigelow's connection, and I'm sure they're talking to Bigelow, and he's getting a lot of questions from them as to when he's going to release these reports, when they're going to release the medal and stuff like that. And as what happened with the first one, I think this is a very carefully controlled release. So they are going to release it at their speed whenever they think it's advantageous. They're not going to jump the gun. This is seems to me like a very carefully orchestrated operation with Jim Semivan and who knows who else is behind this thing, and that they will release it on their time when it's advantageous to them. I've heard all sorts of rumors of what they're going to do next, but it sounds like, and that's what I was told before, this is carefully orchestrated. They've been working on this for a number of years, this whole process of what they're going to do. And that what I was told, and this goes back over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that they do, this is not something where you do something and then you sit there and watch the reaction. What should we do next? What I was told was that when this operation starts to operate, they know exactly what they're going to do. They have deadlines. They're going to do this, then this happens, then this happens. Everything is planned, right? So they know what their next move is. This is not some operation where they're just playing around trying to figure out, how it operates. It's a carefully controlled plan that's been going on for years.
I think you can hear that a bit too, and some of the guys like even George Knapp, the little tidbits that he drops now and then. He knows a little more than what he can say.
Well, yeah, he definitely does say that, and he said he's going to write articles on it because he does make the story about the DIA guys going to Skinwalker and the fact that he was a fly on the wall and he couldn't report this kind of stuff. And he's good friends with Bigelow. He actually was teaching a course because Bigelow put up millions of dollars at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas for a chair on consciousness studies, which I always say is the key to the UFO thing. It's the consciousness thing. And Bigelow understands that angle of the whole thing as well. So George was teaching a course there. George has interviewed him numerous times. I've recovered all these interviews, and we may transcribe these interviews. But George did an interview, as he points out. he did an interview with Bob Bigelow in 2007 when he got the contract, and that Bigelow said, I now have a new partner. I can't talk about it. I've got this organization called BASS that I've started, and I've got a new operation, a new program going. So he went right on George Knapp's show, and even though they didn't detail what it was, George knew. And again, in one of the updates, I actually point out the fact as well that the people, according to Alejandro Rojas, the people who signed the non-disclosure agreements in 2009 with MUFON for working for the money that Bigelow was giving to MUFON also knew where the money was coming from. And they said, you'd be very surprised if you knew where the money was coming from. So a lot of this stuff is leaked out. Lorian Fenton told me 5 years ago that she knew what was going on. As I said, I knew 2 years ago, I didn't know what they were going to do, but I was told clearly that they were about to drop a bomb, and this thing was going to unravel, and they were going to do this thing. And exactly what I was told happened. High-level officials would out themselves, they would come out, and they would say this thing's for real, and that's what happened.
So some weird stuff has been going on too. Like, I've been following this, and it seems like it's kind of, straight up and down, this is, and then we hear things like Julian Assange, saying, this guy's a Scientologist, this guy's full of shit. And then we have, from the other side, we got Eric Davis, who comes out and says Pandolfi's, not liked in the CIA, and Dan Twith is a twitbird, and, what's going on there? Is it, why this back and forth and this infighting? What are the motives there?
Well, this is where I'm less certain than I was before. But one of the possibilities is, and this has to do with Ron Pandolfi, where the reason Eric Davis went on my Facebook and sort of said, I'm going down the wrong road. I'm wasting my time dealing with Dan Smith, the twitbird, and Ron Pandolfi, and Jacques Vallée had warned about this. And I've always said that I would sit back and I would watch the players. Because what happened to me, you have to understand my role in the UFO world. I had 2 close encounter sightings with UFOs in 1975, and that's how it started for me. I tried to get a book published. Nobody would publish the book about what happened in 1975. And it was at that point that I said, this is a waste of time. All I'm interested in is there must be somebody who knows what I saw. And so I've gone to the highest level people that I think know what's going on. That's why I went after the president. That's why I went after the Canadian government. That's why I went to watch what Eric Walker at Penn State University was saying. And that's when I discovered this Ron Pandolfi. And the guy before him was Kit Green, and the guy before him was Arthur Lundahl. There had this supposed desk at the CIA where they studied UFOs and paranormal phenomena and ghosts and remote viewing and psychokinesis, and that it was all connected. It was called phenomenology. And I started watching it. So when people tell me, well, you shouldn't watch Ron Pandolfi, he's whatever, I firmly believe that Ron Pandolfi is the man with the keys. He is he's a very, very powerful guy. He was reported to have told his first wife that his job was more important than the president of the United States. He is we know this about him for sure, that when President Clinton's science advisor asked for a briefing, when he knew Lawrence Rockefeller was coming to the White House in 1993, he asked for a UFO briefing, and that briefing was given to Ron Pandolfi to do. We know this for a fact. So in 1993, he was providing UFO briefings to the White House. Now, the idea about the keys, and this is where Eric Davis comes in. So Eric Davis says, this guy's not very well liked. Everybody in the intelligence community doesn't like him. And when I responded to Eric Davis, I said, yes, you told me this many years ago. I know this story. You told me this. But you also told me the other half of the story. And that was that people, because he had already been working for Hal Puthoff at that time. And he said people like Hal Puthoff are petrified. They're scared of Ron Pandolfi. Because what Ron Pandolfi would be walking around doing is he has the keys. So he's there to control classified material. So what he does is, if you're doing an investigation or whatever, and he comes across and says, you crossed the line, you dragged classified material into your paper, into your stuff, you now have lost your security clearance, it's game over, you're out of business. You are no longer a scientist. You lost your security clearance. And that's what Ron Pandolfi's job is according to what Eric Davis had told me and what I had seen from one other source, was that he is the guy that controls, watches all the UFO material, and he finds out, is someone leaking classified material? Is it secure? And so that's why I watch Ron Pandolfi. Now, Ron Pandolfi's he does some weird stuff. He says some weird things, but you got to distinguish between whether he's acting crazy, whether he's a strange guy when he's not talking about UFOs, and what his job is. I firmly believe that he is the guy who runs the weird desk at the CIA. He is the guy that may have briefed the last 6 presidents. So I really don't care how many crazy things he says. I'm going to sit on the background. I'm not going to make any firm decisions, but I'm going to watch everything that he says. It's very important to watch. So that's where this whole idea comes that I watched Eric Davis, and that's where when Eric Davis comes up, because the reason I met Eric Davis, and this is where you have to always take all this stuff back, that this is not the first rodeo. This is not the first time they've done this. They've done this over and over and over again. And during the 1990s and the early 2000s, Bob Bigelow ran NIDS. And he had all the people. He had Kit Green. He had Putoff. He had all the same characters. Jacques Vallée. All these people were advisors to him, and he was paying these people as consultants to work on UFO problems and stuff like that. And Eric Davis was the head physicist for NIDS. So when I meet him, and he has just been laid off. He's starting to shut down NIDS. Eric Davis is the first guy that gets canned. I meet him like days after, weeks after he gets let go by Bob Bigelow. So he's telling me what's going on, who these people are, and he knows all the people. He knows all the Avery characters. He knows the Cosmic Club people. He knows all the insight, because he was with NIDS. And all the same people that are playing this game today are all the same people who played the game with NIDS. So Eric Davis knows all these people. That's why I say he's very important to talk to. He's very important to listen to, and he's not a BSer. He's going to give you the actual belief of what he thinks is going on, and more importantly, he's worked on classified material. When I was with him, he had lost his job, so he was unemployed when I was talking to him, and then he got a job working for the U.S. Air Force, working on an anti-gravity program or some sort of thing where he was, some sort of program, and it was like one of these things where you're on it for a year or whatever, and then he went off to do something else, and he wrote a paper with Jacques Vallée, and he's an astrophysicist, so he's big into propulsion, he's into zero-point energy, he's into relativity, how do they get here, all those kind of problems. That's his expertise, and he is now the chief physicist for Hal Putoff at the Institute for Advanced Studies, which Hal has run for a number of years in Austin, Texas. So he's a critically important guy to watch, and he's on the inside. So when he gave these, he sort of said that I shouldn't watch Pandolfi. That's fine. I can understand where he's going with that. But then I said to him, okay, here's some questions. And I asked all these questions about the Tom DeLonge operation, because it's apparent. He said that he had worked, he and Hal Putoff had been prime contractors for this $22 million program, because they have the technical expertise. If you're Bob Bigelow, you're not going to do this kind of stuff. You're going to send your metals to various labs. You're going to do the theoretical material. And so that kind of stuff on the zero-point energy stuff, there was a contract, I guess a subcontract given from Bob Bigelow to the Institute of Advanced Studies in Austin. And so that's where, if you read the thing, Eric Davis says, I and Hal were prime contractors, so I know what was going on. So fine, okay, so he's agreed to answer questions. So he's a critically important guy, and a guy who you're not going to have to worry too much about disinformation, that he's going to try to throw us off. He's basically going to tell you his role in this whole thing and answer a lot of the questions that maybe we can discuss next week or the week after when he finally gets back to me.
Yeah, that would be interesting. It's interesting that Eric Davis didn't say much about Pandolfi. All he said was he was not well liked, which, he could have just completely discredited him or said something really damning, but he didn't. He just said, yeah, Ron Pandolfi's not well liked in the CIA. What does that mean,
Well, that is true. I mean, that is true. Because there was the story that there's a rumored story that because Ron Pandolfi was the guy who shut the remote viewing program down. And this is the story, that he shut the remote viewing program down, and that they tried to stop him. It was in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and Ron was trying to get on the list to be read in on it, or to be on the list, and they wouldn't allow him on the list because they knew he was going to try to grab the program and shut it down. And then somehow he went to Congress, or somehow Congress got involved, and Congress made the decision to move it to CIA, and that's in 1995 when the CIA puts out the report and says, we studied this, nothing happened, it's it was a waste of time, even though we did it for 20 years, it was a waste of time. And what I'm saying, all they did was, it's almost like the Blue Book thing. So you shut down Blue Book in '69, all you're doing is moving it from the white world to the black world. So you don't have to have news conferences, and the story, the remote viewing story was starting to leak. Jim Mars was going to do a book on it, and he was frozen. His book was frozen for 6 years. He couldn't do the book. They put a stop on the book. He had the remote viewing story in about 1993. He was going to put it out. So what Ron does, according to the story, is he shuts down the remote viewing program, and then you hear all these stories about NSA contacting this guy in Britain, and Uri Geller being contacted by Ron and brought back into the program after 9/11, and you hear all these stories that it just went into the black world. So that's this whole thing that Ron had this reputation of running around, and he's the guy with the keys. And if you're a guy like Hal Puthoff or Eric Davis, you're working on the very leading edge of classified material. So you know what's classified, you can't bring it into your project, and yet you want to try to achieve something, and you always have to be careful, because the minute you bring up classified material, you can be shut down or you can be thrown in jail. So that's why he had this reputation. He was sort of the guy with the keys who was always watching what people were doing, and it really upset people.
Wow, that's this is getting more interesting every second, man. This is amazing.
It's a wild story, and that's what people got to realize. I've been doing this since 1980, when I first got involved with Bill Moore, and Bill Moore was exactly the same story. There's nothing different with Bill Moore and what's happening right now. Bill Moore was contacted by Defense Intelligence, a guy out of Offutt Air Force Base, and I've had his name escapes me right now. He gets a phone call from Albuquerque, probably from Richard Doty. Then Richard Doty's DIA man in Washington phones Bill Moore from Offutt Air Force Base, and Bill Moore gets in and they say, we're here to help you. We want this program out. We want to tell people what's going on. And he gets 24 sources. This is exactly what happened to Tom Delonge. It's the same story that Tom Delonge gets. There's a DIA guy who go to Skinwalker Ranch. They see some events. They go to Reid. They try to encourage Reid that you should do something about this. Reid and this guy with the UFO sighting, this Ted Stevens, who had this UFO sighting when he was in World War II, him and John Glenn, according to one of the latest articles, Reid actually says that John Glenn told him to do the UFO thing, that we should do this UFO thing. And Inouye, who made the famous speech about the fact that the government had a secret army, there was a secret army and a secret navy and an air force and unlimited money and stuff like this. He made this famous speech. So these guys put it out. But it all starts with DIA again. It's almost the same story, and it's just different characters. A lot of the Avery people that Bill Moore dealt with are with Tom DeLonge, and they were with NIDS, and they were with John Alexander in the mid 1980s when he ran his program. So this is just a repeat of this whole thing. And I would say that these people are not bad people. These are actually people, my impression, and I've been with this for a long time. And if you talk to like Chris Bledsoe will say basically the same thing I will say, that when you get to know some of the people behind this thing, you actually trust these people more than you trust the UFO community. That these are just ordinary people, in my impression, who are just doing their job. And that there are people in this operation who want the story out. And the two prime examples are Jim Semivan, who's an experiencer. He's not like, he got this thing because he didn't have anything better to do. He's an experiencer. He's trying to figure out what's going on as well. And so he's working on this thing of trying to get the story out, trying to get it be investigated, put some money into this thing to figure out what's going on. And there's a guy from NASA who's not been outed yet, who's not identified himself, but he's also an experiencer, and he's involved in this thing. And I would imagine that there's more than just these two in these behind the scenes of this operation, who are people who have had UFO sightings. They're very interested in this whole thing, and that's why they're pushing to get this thing out. whereas people have the idea that it's some sort of disinformation thing, which is totally asinine. If you listen to George Knapp, the same thing came up on Area 51, that this is just a program to throw everybody off. Well, if it's a program to throw everybody off, like on Area 51, well, how well did that work? I mean, you had thousands of people. Everybody goes to Area 51. They had to increase the security 10 times to stop people from going and watching what was going on. And they're up in the mountains looking down on the base. They had to grab a bunch of new land. The same thing here. If this was a disinformation program, how well did this thing work? I mean, it's just gone viral. Everybody's into this. And you and I may be discussing some of the problems with some of the evidence, that maybe there's some of the evidence has been altered or changed or whatever. But the average person on the street thinks it's game over. They think that this is for real. It's changed a lot of people's opinions. It has not disinformed anybody. It has actually moved a lot of people across that line to believe, yes, this story's for real.